Thank you so much, Jean. Okay, a couple of things. I'm going to share a screen. When that happens, I won't be able to see your pretty faces anymore. So we will come back and see you, and we'll answer questions at the end. So here we go. Also, just so you know, our camera is here, and we keep looking here because this is where our computer is, but just go with us, all right? So we're going into full screen here. Can you guys tell me yes out loud that you can hear or you can see or no?
Yes. Yes, we can see.
All right, you can see the 7 pieces, right?
No.
Oh, okay. I think I forgot to share the screen. That might be helpful. Okay, hold on. Oh, don't laugh. Okay, now can you see it?
Yes.
Yes. All right, awesome. You guys are great. All right, so full screen here. So like Dean said, we are with Vanderbloemen Search Group. We're a retained executive search firm, and we partner with churches and faith-based organizations to help them find their key staff. So I am Katie Bivens, and I work with our candidate relations team. I have been here in Houston. Yeah, we're located in Houston, Texas. I've been here for just about 9 months. So I uprooted my life and came over to Houston from Alabama, where I was recruiter for the University of Alabama. So roll tide. I can't see your face if that was a good thing or not. I hope that you guys are saying, yeah, roll tide, but I can't tell. So it's fine. So anyway, that is my story. And this is Jay. And we have a little bio page for Jay. He's our senior executive search consultant, our only senior executive search consultant here at Vanderbloemen. And here are his stats. So you want to talk about yourself?
Yeah, I think it's because I'm one of the oldest people on staff, but I'm a Californian, met the Lord when I was in college at UCLA, felt a call to ministry, pursued that through Fuller Seminary. While I was in school, I did 3 different internships, full-year internship at a large church in Northern California, and then internships at 3 different churches in Southern California while I was in seminary. Got my MDiv, went into full-time ministry, worked in a large church in Florida, then eventually moved back to California where I was executive pastor of a very large church in the Bay Area, Menlo Park Presbyterian. Some people know because John Ortberg is currently the pastor there. And then went into a couple different secular media company, followed by a Christian media company. And while doing that, I was a executive pastor of a church of a couple thousand in the Williamsburg area. So I'm very familiar with Virginia. And then came here 5.5 years ago. And I've been an executive search consultant since really almost we just started. There were 4 people when I came, and now we're about 32, 33 people strong. And I've worked about 130 or more searches. We haven't really counted. When I hit 100, they changed my title to senior consultant. And then it's been a year or so since then. So I've done another 30 or so searches, and I've interviewed a lot of people, like a lot of people. We guessed about 1,000. I don't know how many.
Yeah, and he just flew in from an interview today in Portland, and you have 2 more today.
Yeah, one more today, and then I fly to Atlanta tonight.
So we're gonna mark that up to 1,003 plus candidates, just to be fair. So he's talked to a lot of people all across the country. So yeah, good.
Yep.
All right, we're getting started. So we have 7 pieces of just things that we want to touch on that we feel like would be helpful to you guys as seminary students, and then we'll take some time for questions. But so Jay.
Yeah, I sort of alluded to that. I think one of the things that we see as we're interacting with candidates who are sort of new into the job market. I mean, obviously within the seminary world, you have folks that are going back after for additional education or getting their full-time degree, and they've already been serving in a ministry. And then you have those who are sort of on the track that I was on, which was finished college, wanted to pursue ministry, did an internship, started seminary, and took 3.5 years to do that, and then went into full-time ministry. Everybody has a little different story. We do see a lot of folks going into ministry after a secular career or a ministry career, and they realize they needed some more education and training. One of the things we've noticed as we're talking to candidates or looking at resumes and working with our clients is that our clients really want to see not just the seminary degree, which is actually very, very important. Very few of our clients would, say that education is not important. And a lot of them would say a master's degree, an advanced degree in theology or biblical studies would be, critical for whatever role they're going to be serving in. But if all that is on the resume is an education, and then our clients really probably wouldn't consider a candidate for any significant role. They might consider them for an internship or something like that. So one of the things we strongly encourage here is that while you're in school, look for opportunities to serve, even if you're not getting paid for it. Mm-hmm. Even if you're a volunteer leader and serving in a church setting where you can take on responsibilities. I understand, seminary is challenging. There's educational requirements, writing papers, some of the other things that, the studies you need to do, the reading you have to accomplish. And oftentimes folks are married, they've got kids. And so the pressures during that time are enormous. And so it's easy to say, well, maybe I wouldn't, I just want to focus on my studies. But I would encourage you that as you're in school, if you can find a place to serve, preferably a paid position, so you can help support the family and all of that. Even if it's an internship that may not pay very much, but gives you real hands-on experience. Folks who are looking at your resume later on will be able to see that, and they'll be able to not just see the educational degree, but also the experience you have working hands-on in a church. You understand the culture, you understand the dynamic of working with God's people and some of the nuances of that, as well as some of the challenges of that in real time. The other thing that I discovered when I was in seminary, and one of the reasons why I enjoyed working in various churches while I was in school, was that I was able to practically apply the things I was learning in the classroom right away. I didn't have to wait to see if what I was hearing from my professors actually worked. And sometimes it didn't work, and I learned that and could adapt and apply. And sometimes I realized, boy, they're smarter than me, and most of them were. And so I found that was just a great experience for me to be in I was in 4 different church settings. I was in a large denominational church, I was in a large non-denominational church, I was in 2 sort of small small to medium-sized denominational churches, and every experience gave me a new window into what the job market might be like. And so when I actually got out of seminary and I was getting to the end of my career, as many of you are in seminary, and I was getting a little bit nervous about what am I going to do now, and will anybody want to hire me? I was able to find a really good position because they looked at my past experience and thought I could step into the role as an associate pastor at a very large church. So I was very fortunate, God really blessed that, but also I think my experiences supported that.
All right. The next point is expectations about being hurt in ministry. Can you speak about that? Yeah,
I don't know if you knew this, but churches are full of people.
Hey, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sure. So I'm no longer a student, but when I was a student, I did a lot of work in the school setting, serving in the school setting. Like campus ministries, like doing things like student senator, those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. Talk about serving. How do they look at serving in a non-church setting?
I would say it depends. It depends what you're doing. I have on several occasions. I've talked to student body president of for the seminary, or serving on a senior leadership position within the school from a student side, or even serving. A lot of people work like on campus because there's either work study or there's a position that allows you to get experience there. All experience is good experience, so I wouldn't discount any of it. And sort of what we get paid to do is to look past a resume and say, what are we seeing in this person? Are they a hard charger? Are they pursuing excellence? Are they able to grow things that they're engaged with, whether that's on a school setting or in a church setting? So I would say all of that experience is valuable, but ultimately a church will look at the school experience and say, well, that is a very different environment than what we have here in central Nebraska, or if that makes any sense. So I would say if you do that, if that's where the Lord is leading you, but I would also look for opportunities to serve in outside of a school setting, even again, if you're just volunteering, because everybody looks at that.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. So going back to the question of expectation about being heard in ministry.
Do
So,
you want to do your joke again?
No, I was funny the first
funny.
time. It was funny the first time, but they'll remember it because it's recorded. Churches are notorious for being painful places to work. The statistics of pastors stepping out of ministry because of woundedness are far greater than those stepping out of ministry because of moral failure or things like that, or not being able to be paid. People are hurting people hurt people, and churches attract hurting people. That's why the Lord had created the church, for people like us who are wounded and broken and fallen and need a savior. And so in ministry, expectations are high, often inappropriately high for the pastoral leadership of the church. Oftentimes a senior leader is a lightning rod for things that are happening that have nothing to do with the senior pastor or the associate pastor. So I think it's always best to remember that you are in a fallen world, and that just because we're in a church where Christ is redeeming us and has redeemed us doesn't mean that the brokenness has gone away. So, expect to be wounded. Don't be surprised when people have higher expectations of you than is realistic, and, stay grounded. The ways that, and I guess the follow-up to that kind of reality, and again, I interview people, all week long. I'll probably do 15, 10 to 15 interviews this week with candidates. And I would bet about half of those, they'll tell me a story about a church situation where they were, treated unfairly, where a senior pastor that they worked for was not just a micromanager, but had anger issues, or that they got to the church and came with one set of expectations, and then there was a bait and switch about what they were really willing to pursue as a church. And so disappointment where spouses are not treated very well. I mean, you go on and on and on, and it's pretty much almost every interview that I do, I hear of some woundedness that happened to somebody. Those that survive it have a good perspective on it. They're able to forgive. They're able to endure it. They are able to learn from it and not be jaded by it. Still hope, believing that the church is the hope of the world, and are able to move past it. So the things that I think are helpful to remember as knowing you're going to be heard in ministry. One, remember why you're doing this, your calling. If you sense that God has called you to ministry, then remember what our Savior went through in order to fulfill his ministry, and then understand that whatever we're experiencing is not going to be like that. That the one who's called us is greater than what's going to happen to us. Secondly, ground yourself and surround yourself with people who know you really, really well, who can speak truth into your life. Whether that's, if you're getting too full of yourself, they can speak, knock you down a peg in a way that is healthy and loving, but also to remind you that no matter what kind of criticism you're experiencing or difficulty you're experiencing in your church setting, they can also remind you of who you are and why God called you, and they can love you unconditionally and support you. I would also say find somebody outside of the church setting, preferably, it could be another pastor, but somebody that you can be absolutely honest with. One of the things that probably destroys more ministries than I can count is pastors who isolate themselves and don't have anybody to talk to about it. They can't talk to someone in the church, and this might be personal issues they're going through in their life or just hurts that they're dealing with, and they have nobody in the church they can talk to about it because you're serving your boss, which is the congregation. And so you can't get too real with them. Sometimes it's another staff person. Maybe you're leading them or they're leading you, and they have a sort of a responsibility. It's that if you share something you're just struggling with something, They may not know how to deal with that. So find somebody who's completely disconnected, whether that's a therapist, which is a great idea. Find somebody that, has to keep your secrets, but also find somebody who wants to keep your secrets, somebody outside the church. I just think I was working as a media in a media company, but I was also serving in a startup church in Richmond. And the senior pastor there, brand new church, planted the church in Carytown in Richmond, and great church growing. It's been running 600, 700 right now, but at the time it was like 100 people. And so I would meet with the pastor every week because I wasn't an elder. Didn't have responsibility. And what I said to him was, "You can tell me anything. I'll never think any less of you. I'll love you more, and it'll never go any farther." And so when later on, as the church began to grow, and people say, "Well, I'd preach regularly and things like that," and said, "Why isn't Jay an elder here? Why isn't he in the track to be an elder?" And the pastor was like, "Because I don't want to lose my mentor." Because once I became officially part of the leadership, he couldn't talk to me the same way. So find someone like that, seek out a mentor like that, and I think you'll find a way to survive the many hurts that you'll experience in ministry.
Like I'm getting a counseling session right now. It's going well. I like it. Yeah.
Okay.
That's good stuff.
Did I hurt you?
No,
Okay.
It was great. I feel like this is applicable to me as well.
Okay.
All right. So just a little bit about the job search process. You kind of probably touched base on that the first point, but
where should I start with this?
as just kind of the best practices for a job search process.
Okay. A couple things that I would say to anybody who's pursuing a job is be very clear about where you think God is calling you. If you sense that the Lord is calling you to be a senior pastor, then put yourself on a track that would allow you to ultimately find yourself there. If you sense that your calling is to be in pastoral care or groups ministry or connections ministry or children's ministry or whatever, or student ministry, or missions and outreach or evangelism, whatever the sense of calling you have that the Lord's placed on your heart, put yourself in on a track that's going to allow you to get to the ultimate position that you're seeking. So if you want to be a senior pastor, there are opportunities when you get out of seminary to become a senior pastor. A lot of small churches looking for folks who are passionate and called to do ministry. That might be your calling. That wasn't my calling. I knew that ultimately I was going to serve best in a larger setting. That's because of how I'm wired and where I'm most effective. So I put myself in situations where I could get connected to larger churches, but I put myself in internships where I got to see what was happening in a larger setting, where I had a little piece of the pie and I could gradually take on more. And so, kind of picture where you are as you're pursuing the process. It's pretty, one of the things we see, and Katie could speak to this very well, is that because folks will come onto our site, they'll see a number of opportunities that they're interested in. And, sometimes people are very unrealistic about what they're ready for. Mm-hmm. And so they'll apply for something that really, they don't have any experience that would lend themselves to being that. Now, granted, God anointed David to be king over Israel, and he didn't have a great pedigree, but that only happened once. So I'm not sure that I would expect that every time. So be appropriate in what you're expecting, like with us. Also be very targeted. We see that if someone comes to our site and applies to 20 different opportunities, then what it says to us is they don't really know what they want to do. So if you're applying for a children's ministry job and a senior pastor job and a student ministry job and a connections job and a missions pastor job, and like, which are you? Where is God calling you? So begin to even now pray through what kinds of giftings has God given you? Is it a preaching gift? Is it a pastoral gift? Is it a relational gift? Whatever however God's wired you, and then begin to set yourself up on a track that will allow you to ultimately get where you want to be. Whether that means you're starting off as an associate pastor in a small church, or you're starting off as an intern in a very large church, or you go on and on. You kind of figure out what I'm trying to say there, but. I think you always begin with sort of the end in mind, not to be, cliche, but really thinking about who am I, where do I want to be, and then begin to be really targeted and selective about your process. There is a panic that sets in. I felt it when I was getting into ministry. Like, I was married, we didn't have a job, and where am I going to be when this ends? And it's kind of like any port in a storm. I'll take any job you'll throw at me. So I understand what that feels like, but I'd say stick to your guns a little bit, really target some things that are going to work. The other thing I'd say is don't get tied into a region or an area unless God has specifically called you to it. We see a lot of folks who limit themselves in terms of their search because they want to be near family. Well, I'm all for family, but it's not really the spirit of Abraham that says, go to a land I'm going to show you. So when we'll talk to a candidate and they'll say, well, I'm looking for a position within the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Okay, well, there's a lot of churches there. That might be a great place to look. And I understand wanting to be near family, but maybe God would have something else for you. So be open that God might bring you outside of your circle of comfort and might call you to something great. I moved to Florida after when I graduated from seminary in Southern California. We were away from everything we knew, and it was the best thing for our marriage, and it was the best thing for my ministry experience, because I didn't have some of those support systems in place. I had to build new ones, and that's been a tool that's been very valuable throughout my life and career.
Yeah, just to speak to that, I love to tell the story, but Bob, who's my supervisor, emailed me out of the blue back in June, and was like, hey, we, have a position here at Vanderbloemen maybe you might want to look into. And I had been connected with Vanderbloemen in other ways. And I read the email. It was like, we have a position here in Houston. I read the email and I laughed because I was like, I'm not moving to Houston. That's ridiculous. And the Lord definitely just, took it to me and said, actually you are. So spent some time praying about it and actually had a completely different perspective after, some time in prayer. And it's been one of the best moves that I've made. So I would say just be open just to new opportunities. Will go a long way. All right, next up.
And we do have time for questions after this. So write down if you have a question about any of that, feel free to write it down, and then we'll circle back to it.
Yeah. So just in your experience, you see a lot of resumes and a lot of profiles that come through. Anything that you want to say about resume best practices? I also have some things to say. So
I'm sure you do. You look at more resumes than I do. The resume is an interesting tool, and I think you need to think of it as a tool. It's one of the pieces of information that we use to determine if we want to move forward with a candidate, and therefore it's the first thing we see, and so therefore it's important that you pay attention to it and create one that is going to be easily readable, that is going to have no typos, that is going to be organized in a way that is pleasing to see, where you can get a quick snapshot what your life and career has been. Right or wrong, clients that we work with and they pay us to get past a resume, that's one of the whole reason they bring us on board as part of their search process, is that and we still have to remind them that don't just look at the resume. We have multiple other pieces of data about this particular candidate that we want to show you. But a lot of times they'll just look at a resume and say, no, it's not going to work for me because of X, Y, and Z, whatever it is on the resume. So the resume is important. Things that I would say are important, like we can look at a resume and probably within, 8 to 10 seconds, kind of decide if we want to keep looking at it. And so the things that we're looking for, we want to look at education. So put that in a clear place. We don't care about your high school. We don't care that you were valedictorian. We don't care that you were the president, you're the captain of your basketball team.
We care, just not for this.
No, well, you care. But we're glad to know. We assume you went to high school because you went to college. So we don't need to know that. Feel free to put honors and degrees and things like that about your educational experience, both your undergrad and your graduate experience. That's very useful stuff. I mean, GPA is something we would notice, but it's not something we pay a great deal of attention to. And then when you're listing out what you have accomplished, numbers are really important to actually talk about what you've actually accomplished in the role that you were serving in. Where's the church? What was the church? Where was it? How large was the congregation? How large was your ministry? We are very leery about things like 100% growth in worship attendance, which could have been from 2 to 4, rather than, or 400 to 800.
Or 0 to 2.
Or 0 to, well, that's an infinite number of growth. So you can say, I grew my, started from 0. If you plant a church and it grows to 100, that's awesome. We want to know that. So numbers actually do matter. The Lord loves what you're doing anyway, but when we're looking at you in light of a job that we're working on, they do want to see that you have a track record of growing things or expanding things, or that you've had certain kinds of experiences within a setting that is similar to whatever it is that you're looking towards.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add to that, we hear any candidate that applies to a position, we evaluate their resume. So we definitely see all sorts of resumes. We dig deep. We look beyond how it looks aesthetically. But I would just say, as a PR gal who has looked at a lot of resumes, it is great if you can organize it in a way that makes sense, and that really highlights who you are and the accomplishments that you've achieved, and the things that you're passionate about, and within that ministry. Definitely highlight those things. I mean, I know no one likes to brag about themselves, but you got to brag about yourself. Yeah. So you Google, resume best practices. There are a lot of templates there. Just keep it clean. And
career services can help with those things as well.
Career services can help with those things. That's why they're there. Absolutely. So,
shameless plug.
Yes, it's great.
Yeah, I would say also along those lines, you mentioned simple and clear. There's a lot you can do with graphics now, and pictures are great. But if you clutter it up too much, it's really hard to figure out, have something to figure out where you're supposed to be looking. So while, a lot of information is good and pictures are great, really love that, to be able to see people, rather than just text. But if you get too crazy with it, we can't even figure out, where you've been or how long you were there or things like that. So.
All right, moving along. So talk to us a little bit about licensing and ordination.
So, and some of you probably, might already be licensed. The difference between licensing and ordination: licensing is the church will, when you're performing the sacerdotal services of a pastor, I think that's the word, like you're serving communion, you're preaching, you're teaching, you're serving as a staff person, you can be performing weddings. The church can license you, and the body, whatever the board or whatever the governing body can license you with the state, allow you to do that. Ordination is sort of a step beyond that, and the process of being ordained is different in every denomination. I was a Presbyterian, very rigorous ordination process. I had exams. It was a 4-year process. I was overseen by, a denominational body to make sure that I was okay. I had to have a master's of divinity. I had to have the biblical languages. I had to have, church history, all of those sorts of things. Most of the denominations, like in the major denominations, would require a master's of divinity for ordination. So what you'd want to ask yourself is, where am I going? What's my tribe? Is it a non-denominational tribe? Then the ordination requirements are a little bit different. Is it a tribe that's tied to a larger group? Whether that's ARC or SBC, something like that. You want to find out what's required for those denominations. And once you do that, the best thing to do is go find somebody who's in the place where you want to be. Identify them, reach out to them, and ask them what you should be doing to get ready for the ordination process. A lot of denominations have systems set up that will allow you to do that. If it's a non-denominational or independent, you'll want to go to the individual churches. So just a few things about licensing and ordination.
Everyone's different. So thank you. Avoiding burnout. This is a hard one.
It's a hard one. Yeah. And it goes back to a little bit of the hurts, the combination of being wounded or expectations that aren't met within your own self about what you dreamed you would be doing and where you ended up. Those kinds of things really do play a part in burnout. It's, churches, like to run you hard and put you away wet, using a horse analogy. They do care about you, but they also don't. You're there to serve them, and a lot of us who go into ministry have a people pleasing addiction. I did. Most of the people I know do that were in ministry, those who end up getting burnt out, and so it's really. You really have to work on that. Basically, you have to decide who you're trying to please. Are you trying to please the Lord? Or are you trying to please people? Because there's a never-ending supply of opportunity to pour yourself out for people. The needs will always be greater than your capacity to meet them, and so you'll always feel like you're falling short. Ministry is unique in that it's never done. There's always more that could be done. I was writing a blog post right now, and the things I wish I had done when I was in ministry, a different kind of ministry than what I'm in now. And the first thing I thought of was, I wish I had spent more time with Jesus than I did preparing to talk about him. That I would work, messages when you preach, it's your public face. It's how, in many ways, how you are judged in ministry. If you preach a great sermon, people love you, think you're great. Now, they won't remember it the following week, but as they're walking out your door, or they're greeting you after the service, and they're like, "That was a great message, Pastor," and it feeds your ego. And so you tend to focus on, "Well, I got to preach a great message." And I really wished, in retrospect, that, because I did burn out in ministry. I'm a guy that likes to take on new things all the time, but I never let anything go. So I was, I would start things, they would go well, and they would grow, and then I'd be like, I'm bored with that, I don't want to maintain it, but I kept it, and then I started something new. But I would, if I preached about half the time at Menlo Park when I was there. And that's, thousands of people, and Condoleezza Rice is in my congregation, and all these, high and mighty people that, that I'm trying to impress, that there's no way I could. So I'm working my tail off, countless hours trying to preach a message that was just clear and concise and relevant and life-changing. And meanwhile, I'm not spending time with Jesus. I'm not letting him nurture my soul. I'm ready to talk about him, and I could say really great things about him, but I don't know that I could say that I knew him all that well in terms of my personal relationship. So I really wish if I could go back in time, that I would have spent more time with the Lord than I did getting ready to preach. And I think that would have affected my burnout. I also think be willing to let go of things. Boundaries, there's a lot of talk about boundaries these days. Sometimes I get a little frustrated because I think we're so busy creating boundaries. The Lord did call us to kind of pour ourselves out for him. So you have to balance all of that, the calling and the commitment, but with the ability to do it over a long period of time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And setting up healthy boundaries, having people who will hold you accountable to that, taking your day off or day and a half off, whatever you get, and really using it as your Sabbath. Those are all things that I think will help burnout. And I would also say, find that person, as I mentioned earlier, find that person who doesn't have a dog in the fight as to whether or not you succeed in ministry or not, but just going to love you no matter what. Find that person and let them be your support system.
All right. Last one, discerning the right fit in ministry. Some of this might be really easy for people. Sometimes it's not.
Yeah, I think it goes back to a little bit what I was saying earlier, that at this stage of your career, you might not know what you don't know about what you ought to be doing. And so some of this is trial and error. finding out what brings you joy. I mean, one of the questions I'm always asking in interviews is, okay, talk to me about what energizes you in ministry and talk to me about what drains you. Talk to me about you when you're doing it, you feel like if I could just do this all the time, I would be the happiest pastor on the planet. And tell me about the times when you just think, I just want to pack up and quit. And usually as you're beginning to answer those questions, you figure out more about how you're wired. I think all of the tools that are out there now for personality profiles are really, and spiritual gifts, inventories and things like that, really useful tools. We use those here in our office. We use Ministry Insights as sort of a tool. We have a language. Katie and I are both yellows. We're high I on the disc. So we like fun. We like, we like to be includers. We like people. We like each other. We like to be around everybody. But knowing those things about yourself, really helpful. I'm extroverts and intuitive feelers, those sorts of things. So knowing that about yourself is going to help you figure out what kind of role you're going to be best in. If you're an introvert, it's okay to be, and it's great to be an introvert. Really, some of the most gifted pastors and preachers in America are introverted, and you would never know it. You need to know how to take care of yourself, how to find alone time. But if that's what you do and your whole job is supposed to be, going into places where you don't know anybody and connecting with them, that is going to be a miserable job for you. So you need to think about that. Or if you're highly extroverted, if it's going to be a job that's going to put you in an office or in a cubby for, 8 hours a day, you will go nuts because you've got to connect with people. So you need to figure out, you need to know who you are. And then identify where you find joy. I really do think if we're gifted in something, it's, we're going to experience joy in it at some level. Even if I was gifted in preaching and I found joy in it when I did it, I hated it before I did it, and then I hated it after I was done. But I loved it in the moment. But I was gifted at it. So find out what you're gifted in, and then begin to say, well, what could I be doing that would allow me to use my strengths and my gifts? And then what kind of, is that in a church setting? Is that in a college setting, or or is it in a parachurch ministry? How has God wired me? And then go after that, go pursue that.
You just have to, I think, also trust that, obviously the Lord knows the desires of your heart, and you're going to get there one way or another. It may not look the way that you think it should, or, I never thought I would be here. But God used everything in my past to get me here. So, but yeah, I think definitely knowing who you are and what makes you tick is going to be key to this.
The other thing that I would say, and we spent a lot of time on this, is one of the reasons I think why we've been as successful as we have been, is that we pay a lot of attention to culture, like church culture, DNA. Mm-hmm. Not every church is the same. It's made up of different people, and it has its own unique DNA. And that sometimes what we're trying to do in our process is trying to make that DNA match, right? We're not, like, if it's a heart, using the medical terminology, we're trying to do a heart transplant. You can have a healthy heart and a healthy body, but if they don't match, then it's going to be, it's going to be ugly. Everybody's going to die. We don't want that. So knowing who you are, but then also doing your due diligence to understand who the church is, to ask the right questions. Don't just assume because of what they told you that is real. Find some other sources. Ask people who know about the church. If you're thinking about taking a job there, find out what's it really like. Talk to people who've worked there in the past, as much as you're able to do that. Again, I hear the bait and switch story so many times that I always say, be careful about what you hear, because church is like a date. You're putting on your best. It's your first date. You're putting on your best face. You're looking as good as you can possibly look. And the church is doing the same, trying to convince you that they would be a great place to work. Obviously you need to have more than one date and begin to really ask the hard questions about what's it like to really work here. Because I think ultimately that's going to determine your ability to stay and stick in a position that really is the right fit for you. Yeah.
I'm going to flip ahead real fast before we have questions. Because I'm going to unshare my screen so we can see you guys. Just know that if we don't get to your questions today, you can email them to hello@vanderbloemen.com, and we will be happy to answer those questions. And then also just a couple of key practical things. If you're currently job searching or thinking about it, or you still have a couple of years, you want to start looking, just take a look at our site and you can see what kind of things are there. We have, I think, like 100 searches. So we have a lot of churches looking for positions. Follow us on social media. We will post about new positions there, as well as we're all required to write blog content about just a ton of different topics. So follow us there. We'll tweet out our blogs. And then, I'm happy to be your contact, your key point person as well. And so that's my email address, kbivens@vanderbloemen.com. Feel free to email me. You can also find me on the website. So I'm going to unshare the screen so that we can see your faces, and we'll have some time for questions. So it looks like we didn't lose anybody, so that's good. Thanks for not signing off, you guys. We appreciate that.
Even if you just have it muted, it's fine.
Yeah. So we'll start, Dean, we'll start with the room. Are there any questions in the room? And then I see that we've got some questions via chat too.
Oh, yes, you guys were talking about resumes. I was just wondering, how important is LinkedIn?
Oh, LinkedIn.
Well, you can speak to that. That's
I can speak to that. Yeah, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn's great. I think it's another great tool. It's not going to make or break your search, but it's definitely another way to get yourself out there. In terms of a social media standpoint. It's a quick online resume that we can search for and find. So I think LinkedIn is great. But
I think that probably to tag onto that, I think your social media presence is important. You need to pay attention to it. Churches will look at that. So not to scare you, but a really poorly placed picture or comment they'll see it and it could cost you a job. So you need to think about what your online presence looks like.
Yeah, that's like your personal brand, basically. Like that's how you're presenting yourself to the world, and a lot of people can see it. So definitely be careful with that. Great question. I say yes, LinkedIn, but I'm one person, so it's a definitely helpful tool.
No, it's a great tool. I think anything you can do that gets, that creates a way for people to find you and to learn about you is useful. So, and also connect you to other people. You really can connect through LinkedIn, and it's a great tool.
Are there any other questions in the room?
Oh, I have a question. When you were talking about when you know what you're called to do, you look for this internship that fits for what you want to do. My personal experience is that I did that, and I found out that the church was more concerned about what people think and the aesthetic look of the church. I have to cut my internship short because I felt I wasn't getting what I needed to get from experience and also discipline and the passion was not even there, even though it was a lot of congregation. It wasn't there.
Did you get all that?
Yeah, in trouble. It kind of broke up a couple of times in there, so I'm not sure I captured the message. Maybe.
What's your main question?
My main question is, what if you go to a large congregation and you felt, okay, you're called to pastor a church, and the practice there is not what you expected. And you have to go to a smaller church where you'll be able to do what you felt a church should be like, not the aesthetic look and, people pleasing look that we have. So my question is, how fruitful is it to keep looking for such a church? And when you get there, you already signed all the papers and it wasn't what you expected.
Yeah. When you get, no matter what happens, again, guarantee you that the church is not going to be what you expected it to be. You will be disappointed. That being said, I would, once you've made a decision to go somewhere, from where I'm sitting, I think you would agree, stick it out for as long as you can, at least a year.
Yeah.
One of the things that, right or wrong, and I always have to tell search committees and hiring managers that, just because a person has only stayed, has bounced around a little bit, it doesn't mean that they want to. It just means that they've had some experiences that didn't turn out the way they had planned and had to make a change. But length of time in a location is pretty valuable. Even if it's just, I learned how to navigate really difficult situations. I didn't learn much else. I did that. I'm not sure if there was a question in there about, is it better to go to a small church where I can have an influence? I'm trying to think if that was, or to a larger church that, that didn't work, that may have expectations that I can't meet. But I'm not sure what that was.
Yeah, and we actually did a webinar today for our candidates that it was how to discern if it's time for a new church job. And a lot of things that we talked about are there's going to be conflict in your job process, in your career. There are going to be points of conflict. And so you got to figure out where the conflict is coming from. Is it internal? Are you thinking, I really thought I was going to be able to grow more here and I haven't been able to? Or is it external? Is there a colleague or staff member that it's just been hard for you guys to get along? And figure out if there is a way to resolve that conflict and if it's worth, if it's something that you can get through or if it's worth, the move. And so I think a lot of that ties in, but I think I think a year is a really great benchmark to try to hit if that happens.
Yeah, 2 is better than 1. And I don't think that if you can get 2 years, that's probably great. Are
there any other questions in the room?
What about the more mature student who comes into a switch of careers and you are preparing, you may not have you may have experience, but not necessarily the great amount of ministry experience. I hear you about probably getting involved in internships, but how likely, I'm curious about churches, and do they feel more confident in probably younger persons who can grow the church and who can connect, or what's the likelihood of them going for more mature students who necessarily have that extensive formal ministry experience?
Yeah, I would, I regularly, I'm looking at resumes of folks who have experience outside of the church as part of their story. And I think it's incredibly valuable. We're trying to figure out what you want to do in your resume is to be able to link the skill sets that you developed while you were in a different role. Were you, depending on whatever the role was it a position of leadership? Did you oversee people? Did you have to do strategy? Were you working in a more of an administrative role, and how does that translate into ministry? So you always want to think, how do I position that or package it in a way that's going to help people see that this experience, while not in a church setting, will have a lot of value if you brought it into the church setting. I have to say, I came out of seminary, I went right into ministry. I did, and then I went from ministry in a very large setting to a secular media startup in San Francisco. And after I worked there for 2 years, I thought, oh my gosh, I wish I had done this earlier, because I would have talked to the business leaders in my church so much differently than I would now. Like, I realized that me talking about my sabbatical or my study leave just makes everybody else mad, because I couldn't, a week off was like impossible for me to get because of the kind of work I was doing. So being able to, I think that kind of experience is invaluable. You just understand work ethic differently. You understand relationships differently. You're also working with people who don't have any reason to be nice. So if you're in a secular setting, so how do I work with difficult people? Because you're going to work with them in a church. So, but if you're in a secular setting, non-church setting, people no one pays them to be nice. So they may be nice, they may not be, but you've worked in some hard situations, had to work through some conflict. Those are all things that I would highlight in a resume. And then I do know that, maybe the next part of that question is how do churches view that? Everybody does a little bit differently. We talk to churches about what they're looking for, and some are looking for that, I want a young, person who's ready to connect with younger folks in our community, who's, passionate and doesn't need to make a lot of money. That's no small thing. versus somebody who's a little bit older, maybe has a family that they're trying to support. But then they bring sort of a wisdom piece. And so you have to, kind of look through the job profile. Then no one's going to say what they're looking for in terms of age and experience, right? But they're going to say things like somebody who's been in a church for, 15 years or has 15 years of experience doing some sort of ministry. Well, you get an idea that, okay, they're looking for somebody who's got a little bit more life experience behind them, and begin to target your searches around that.
Mm-hmm. Every church is different. We've seen candidates, 23 years old get hired, and someone get hired at like 62. So every single church is different. So just read those job descriptions, pray about that, discern that, and just be open and apply.
Mm.
I have a question.
Okay.
In my experience, so much of churches is that that intangible, softer side of an organization and their people culture. Even we'd call it that whole spiritual culture based on their theology and you mentioned some of those tough questions to ask that would uncover some of that stuff. I was wondering if you had a couple classic open-ended questions that might help me that I would ask in an interview or something.
Off the top of my head, something like, tell me about somebody who recently left your staff. What happened? Why did they leave? Have you ever had to fire anybody? What happened? What happened there? How did you handle it? What happens when you're in an associate role? What happens when someone disagrees with a senior pastor? Or if there's conflict on staff, how is that dealt with? Talk to me, what do you guys do? What's your schedule like? Really? What do you do on your day off? If they're telling you, well, a day off, right? If they give you that kind of answer, well, that's going to tell you a bit about their culture and kind of how they approach things. If they give you some really clear answers like, I go out with I turn my phone off. I'm not around. I'm not available on my day off. That tells you some things too. And how is that handled by the powers that be? There's a few questions that come to mind. I don't know. Maybe think of some other ones. But.
I think those are great.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And also the whole, maybe this isn't appropriate for me to ask, but the whole pay conversation, compensation, monetizing, what you're bringing to the church. How do you navigate those conversations?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Church is just funny. We're always having conversations with our clients that they need to rethink their pay strategy because they always want, Jesus but married, who's willing to come for $10,000 less than the, average person in the church because they don't have a budget. So that's just, unrealistic expectations. So we're always saying, you're probably gonna have to pay more than what you think.
Okay.
Or we'd say, you're just not going to get what you have to lower your expectations of what you're going to get for the kind of salary you're willing to pay. So, but as a candidate, when we're working with folks, we navigate that for both. We kind of work both sides and help take that out of that painful, awkward conversation. So when you're working with us, we're the ones going, okay, what are your expectations? And the church, well, here's what the church is willing to do. And we navigate. But when it's your conversation with them directly, no one's going to ever pay, where you start is your starting point for where you're going to end. And they're going to want to lowball you. I mean, and I don't, good for them. And that's when and you want the job and they know they have you a little bit over a barrel. So but this is the only time you're going to have a chance to negotiate. So you need to figure out what is your, what do you need? And, based on where they are. And then I think a direct conversation with whoever is responsible for that, making those decisions and saying, look, this is what I'm really going to need. And also be willing to walk away if you sense that, it's not going to provide for you. Those are things, the church doesn't want, if they've offered you the job, they want to hire you and they know it's hard to find someone else. So it's unlikely that they have a number two that they're going for. So this is your chance to be able to have that direct conversation. This is what I feel like I need. Be willing to, God does provide, and He really, really does. So usually, when we think, like I came to work here and I took a 50% pay cut from where I was to come here. And
love us.
and I do, because I love my job, and it wasn't enough, but it has become enough. And so, because I knew God had called me to this, and He's more than made up for it. And if you really believe this is what God's calling you to do, you go and you trust, and God does provide, and He does fill in the gaps, and He does, do miracles and all those sorts of things. So it's really it's a bit of, it sounds, I don't want to over spiritualize it, but it is a spiritual conversation. So you have to be wise but also trusting. I don't know if that helps you at all, but that's kind of how I would respond.
Okay, so thank you. I know it's minutes after 4. We decided to be wide with my time. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, all of you, and thank you for the, 19 people that were online.
Yeah.
Now, we do have several questions that came in the chat box. Can we email them to you, or
Yes.
How do we get them to you?
Yeah, you can either email them to me, or the easiest thing will be probably to email them to hello@vanderbloemen.com, and I'll make sure that I get them and we answer those questions for you guys. Or you can email them directly to me, but if you were able to write down my email address, either way works fine.
So people online, did you hear that? Or is that okay? Can you send your questions to hello@vanderbloemen.com?
Here, I'm also typing it in.
Everybody is saying yes. Okay.
Okay.
Great. So,
2 options.
So thank you all. We appreciate the time, and we appreciate your presence here. Pray that the Lord goes before you as you leave, and makes the rest of your day, redeems the time that you spent here, makes the rest of your day profitable, useful, and also in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us.
We will be following up with the survey so we can find out how we did and see if we can do better. Thank you for coming. We appreciate you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you
Have a
all.
great day.
All right, take care.
All right, so everybody's leaving, so that's good.
All right. Well, we will touch base, right?
Yes, absolutely. Thank
All
you
right.
very much. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Dane.
Bye.
If you're not signed in either on paper or online. But if you have signed in one of those 2 ways, it's okay.
See, we are just getting. How many copies?
So did you sign in one of the 2 ways? Thank you, coming.
Thanks for having
Good.
us.
Yeah. You're welcome. I'm willing immediately after this.
I'll see you back in the office.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
this next year is all.
So we have another people. All right. So let's check it. So you said it was good? You said it was good?
Yeah, this was very good and very honest.
Yeah.
Did you want it to still do something with business?
Not really. I mean, mom's business helps it. You feel
That is true. That is true.
Yeah, my heart was certainly.